It always starts small. A sarcastic remark disguised as humor, a look that lingers too long, a subtle shift in tone when you walk into the room. And for a moment, you wonder, was that on purpose? Or are you just being too sensitive? You brush it off. You stay silent. You tell yourself it's not worth reacting to. But here's the truth no one tells you. The first time someone disrespects you and gets away with it, they're not the only one watching. Everyone else sees it too. And in that silence, a message is sent. Not just about them, but about you. Because disrespect that goes unchecked doesn't stay small. It grows, it spreads, and eventually it defines you. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He knew that in a world built on power and perception, respect isn't earned. It's enforced, not with noise, not with anger, but with presence, with reaction, with strategy. The first rule, never react emotionally. That's what they want. They want the twitch in your face, the raised voice, the defensive explanation, because the moment you get emotional, you've given them control. Instead, go silent, but not passive. Your silence is not absence. It's containment. It's a pause that breaks the rhythm of their game. Look at them, unblinking, unshaken, and let them feel it, the void where your energy used to be. That's your first move. You don't justify, you don't diffuse, you don't play along. You let the air go cold. Because when disrespect is met with calm withdrawal instead of appeasement, it reveals what it truly is. Insecurity dressed as confidence. Weakness pretending to be strength. And now they don't know what to do with that silence, because silence, when held with confidence, becomes a mirror, and most people are terrified of their own reflection. But here's where it gets surgical. When they disrespect you, they're expecting a reaction, an outburst, a correction. What they're not expecting is exposure. That's where you flip the script. You ask a question, calm, sharp, direct. Did you mean that the way it sounded? Or interesting? Would you say that again, slowly? No insults, no accusations, just a scalpel instead of a hammer, because when you ask, you're not defending, you're inviting. You're giving them a chance to double down in front of witnesses. And when they hesitate, and they will, the power shifts, not through dominance, but through doubt. And doubt is more powerful than confrontation, because someone who creates doubt doesn't have to demand respect. They make others adjust. They create gravity. And the ones who move others without raising their voice are the ones remembered. But there's a deeper truth. Most people can handle one strong moment, one confrontation. What they can't handle is consistency. So after you withdraw, after you expose, don't go back to normal. That's where most people lose ground. They call it letting it go. Machiavelli would call it weakness. You redraw the lines, you reframe the relationship, not with declarations, but with absence. You don't laugh at their jokes. You don't reply with the same warmth. You stop giving them access to your attention, your most valuable currency. And when others ask what happened, you say nothing. Let the silence speak louder than anything you could explain, because when someone loses your energy and they don't know why, they start questioning everything. That's power. Not revenge, not drama, but consequence. Now comes the test. Because people don't always challenge you with volume, they test you with subtlety. A passive remark in a group setting, a forgotten invitation, a fake compliment with a knife hidden beneath the smile. This is the second wave, and it's not random, it's calculated. They want to know if your boundary was a performance or a principle. And here's where most people fail. They confuse being the bigger person with being predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate, but you become unpredictable. You don't respond with anger, you don't clarify, you shift quietly, strategically. When they speak, you address someone else. When they joke, you pause, not to laugh, but to let the room notice your silence. And when they reach for your attention, you let them touch nothing. No warmth, No hostility, just distance, surgical, controlled, and unforgettable. Because the truth is, disrespect doesn't need to be punished. It needs to be priced. If it costs nothing, it becomes a habit. But if it costs presence, connection, access, it becomes rare. That's the Machiavellian principle. Consequences aren't emotional, they're educational. You're not trying to hurt them, you're teaching them, and more importantly, you're teaching the room. Everyone is watching, and when they see that one moment of disrespect costs someone your energy, your alliance, your inclusion, they take note. They adjust. They measure their words, not because they fear you, but because you've made it expensive to be careless around you. And in social dynamics, cost is everything. The more valuable your energy becomes, the more intentional people become in your presence. That's when the shift happens. The power dynamic flips. You're no longer chasing respect. You're defining the terms under which it can exist. But not everyone will get the message. Some won't retreat. Some will escalate. These are the disruptors, the ones who feed off chaos, who confuse conflict with relevance. They're not just disrespectful, they're performers looking for an audience. And when they realize they can't provoke you emotionally, they'll try another tactic, forcing you into visibility. That's your cue. Not to fight louder, but to expose smarter. You don't respond with ego. You respond with frame control. You turn their own behavior into their consequence. In front of others, you say things like, "Is that how you usually talk to people?" Or, "Interesting. Do you joke like that at work too?" You're not insulting. You're reflecting. You're letting them hear themselves out loud. And that's when it hits them. They've been checkmated, not through confrontation, but through illumination. They realize they're no longer in control of the narrative. You are, and the room feels it, because the most devastating power move isn't aggression, it's exposure. You make their insecurity public without ever raising your voice. And in that moment, you do something far more lasting than win an argument. You rewire the social current around them. Now others see it too. Their illusion breaks, their dominance crumbles, and they're left with the one thing they can't manipulate, the truth of how small they look in comparison to your control. That's when the game changes permanently. They won't try again, not because they fear your retaliation, but because they can't afford another reveal. You didn't humiliate them. You allowed them to reveal their own weakness, and that's a wound no apology can fix. You stayed calm, you stayed measured, and in doing so you became untouchable.
And here's where the transformation is completed, not in public but in silence. Because even after all that, some will test the waters again, not with bold attacks, but with subtle attempts to return. A casual smile, a shared joke, an invitation to go back to normal. But here's the difference now. You're no longer playing defense. You're crafting perception. This is your reputation test, not just in front of them, but in front of everyone who watched what happened. And you don't pass this test by explaining yourself. You pass it by being unchanged. You don't re-engage. You don't soften. You remain exactly as you are, distant, present, cold, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because now they know. You're not someone who gives second chances to those who tested your worth. You're not seeking validation. You're not performing forgiveness. You've become something else entirely. An image that corrects people before you even speak. Machiavelli would call this selective presence. The moment when you stop being someone others can approach freely and start being someone they measure their words around. You don't dominate through intimidation. You command through discipline. Your silence becomes a boundary. Your energy becomes a privilege, and your absence speaks more than your presence ever did. People stop disrespecting you not because you asked, but because you've made it obvious. Violating your space comes with a cost they're not willing to pay. This is how power shifts in rooms, not with raised voices, but with recalibrated behavior. And once that happens, once your name carries that weight, everything else begins to move around you. Jokes die before they reach your ears. Conversations shift tone when you join. People pause, not out of fear, but out of instinct. You didn't build popularity, you built presence. But presence alone isn't the final layer. There's something even rarer: control without visibility. The kind of influence that doesn't require your constant participation, only your reputation. This is the apex of psychological dominance. You're no longer navigating social games, you've stepped above them. When your name enters a conversation, it doesn't come with gossip, it comes with weight. He doesn't play around. She doesn't come back after a line is crossed. These aren't warnings, they're facts. Self-regulated truths earned not by aggression, but by withdrawal. Because now, your energy has become scarce. And scarcity creates demand. You don't need to demand respect. You've become the reference point of how people should behave, the silent standard that no one wants to violate again. And that, Machiavelli would say, is the true seat of power. Not in being feared, not in being loved, but in being calculated. And if by some chance they return with regret, if the same person who once disrespected you tries to re-enter your space, you don't punish, and you don't console. You do something more disarming. You stay exactly the same. No extra smile, no explanation, just stillness. Because mercy, when delivered without warmth, is the most powerful response. It tells them everything they need to know. You are no longer a threat. You're irrelevant. And that breaks them. Because the one thing more painful than confrontation is being forgotten by someone they thought they could control. You're not proving anything anymore, you're just continuing. And they're no longer part of the path you walk. That's not cruelty. That's sovereignty. When you no longer need to protect your name because your absence does it for you, that's when you stop being part of the game. You become the board it's played on. And now, everything changes. Because once you've reached this level, where your reactions are measured, your presence is intentional, and your silence is louder than confrontation, you're no longer viewed as a participant in the room. You become the atmosphere itself. People don't just watch what you say, they watch how others behave around you. They notice who hesitates, who adjusts, who chooses their words with care. That's not coincidence. That's the ripple effect of discipline. You've stopped chasing approval. You've stopped explaining your value. You've stopped trying to prove anything to anyone. Now your attention is earned. Your presence is not promised. Your respect is not given. It's mirrored. Because those who know what you carry won't risk losing access to it. Machiavelli understood this timeless truth. Respect isn't about volume. It's about consequence. And consequence doesn't need an announcement. It needs clarity. So when someone dares to cross your line, and you respond not with anger but with removal, not with vengeance but with absence, you're doing more than defending your worth, and you're redefining it. You're sending a message to everyone watching. I do not belong to this chaos. I choose peace and I protect it with distance. And that distance becomes a wall no one dares to test again. Because once you've made it known that you don't tolerate even 1% of disrespect, not as a joke, not in passing, not once, you've built something that no insult can touch. A reputation carved in precision, presence, and complete command. That's how kings moved in Machiavelli's world. And that's how you move in yours. Quiet, clear, untouchable.